Good morning. It is early on a Tuesday morning here in New York in August 2021. It's a little before 5 a.m. I have to record podcast episode number 168, which is entitled The Panic Attack Hangover. And I thought I would try something new since I generally don't pay much attention on YouTube or on the video platforms. I'm going to record myself recording this podcast. You guys can sort of watch it be produced, and you can watch it right here and you'll see me record the podcast, something a little different. And then in this episode, I promise I will pop on over here to YouTube and I will pay attention to the comments. I know I generally do not on YouTube, but for this episode, we will do a little bit of a experiment and we'll see how it goes on YouTube. So this is a way to listen to this episode of the podcast or watch this episode of the podcast without having just a still image and the silly audiogram thing. We'll see how this works out. If it works out okay, then I'll make it a regular thing. Anywho, this is what it looks like when I record a podcast episode, especially early in the morning, which is when I tend to do these things. I literally have rolled out of bed. I made myself a cup of tea, got it right here. I've actually been a little under the weather the last couple of days, so my nose is a little stuffed up and my throat is a little more scratchy, so my voice is a little scratchier than normal. Forgive me for that. No, I do not have COVID-19, I promise. But anyway, this is what it looks like. I tend to just keep the lights off and record that way. And I wing these as I go. So you'll see how it works out, but you'll hear all the stuff. You'll hear all the theme music and all that stuff. So maybe it'll be interesting. Who knows? All right, let's get going. This is what it looks like when we record a podcast. So here we go. Dudes and dudettes, welcome back to The Anxious Truth. This is episode number 168. Welcome back to the show. Today's podcast episode is called The Panic Attack Hangover. We're going to talk about that sort of the aftershocks, the after effects of panic, what happens after you have a panic attack, and it sort of lingers. And for some people, it will linger for a half hour. For some people, it will linger for a couple of hours. And for some people, especially when they feel like they have they've been doing really great. Like I haven't had any panic in a long time. It's been a week or two or a month, and then I had a panic attack. Sometimes the panic attack hangover, those after effects will last for days or even a week. So this topic was suggested by a friend in Australia. It's a really good topic. I cannot believe that I haven't talked about it before, but I haven't. So here I am talking about it this week. For show notes on this episode, you can go to theanxioustruth.com/168. I'll have them up all on the website, along with a bunch of other interesting links to like my books and all that stuff. So let's get into it. The Panic Attack Hangover. And by the way, for the record, this one is going to be less than 20 minutes because I could see by my analytics that after 20 minutes, even in my most interesting and most popular podcast episodes, the listenership falls right off. So you have spoken and I have heard you. I will keep these shorter. So what is the Panic Attack Hangover? All right, let's talk about a panic attack. We all know what this is. If you've been listening to the podcast for any length of time and following along, clearly, you've heard me talk about panic attacks many, many, many times. And probably heard a zillion other people talk about panic attacks. You know what they are. You know what it feels like. You may have had a zillion of them yourself. So you have a panic attack, which we have always defined as this is a physiological event, right? Panic is a physical event. That's true. You feel panic in your body. And it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. If we do it right, or we have a good relationship with panic and anxiety, it starts, it builds, it peaks, it comes back down. And in many instances, when you get really good at this, that all can happen in the space of under 10 minutes. If you're not really good at it yet, and you're learning and you're practicing, and this is all kind of new to you, then that's okay if you can't get through it in 10 minutes. That takes time and repetition and practice and all of that stuff, and learning how to navigate through, sort of float through, accept through, surrender to the panic, and just let it happen and let it come back down. And it always ends, right? It always ends. So you guys have heard me talk about this about a zillion times. There's a zillion other podcast episodes where I talk about the mechanics of panic, and it's in my books and all that stuff. So what happens after the panic attack? Excuse me. So what happens after the panic attack? That's the question for today. That's the question that we're addressing now. What is the panic attack hangover, those after effects? So about 2 or 3 months ago, it was around 10:30 at night, and I experienced panic for the first time in a very long time. And it can happen to me now and then, a couple of times a year, maybe not. And I tried to document it on Instagram, but the whole episode, in terms of the actual panic itself, probably lasted less than 5 or 6 minutes. So by the time I sort of stumbled across the house back into the office and got the lights on for the cameras and everything, it was already over. But I did document it. It's on my Instagram stories, where I stayed up for about an hour afterwards, and I just let people ask me questions about what it felt like. And in the beginning of that series of Instagram stories, you'll see that I actually looked different for the first maybe 5 minutes or so, you could tell, like, I didn't look the way I usually look. I was definitely breathing a little more heavily. I was a little shakier. You could see that. But at that point, I would have absolutely told you that the panic was over. It had peaked and it had come back down. It was done. Nonetheless, I was still experiencing some of those like physiological sort of aftershocks. So panic attack hangover has what I think are really three components to it. And that's what I want to talk about today. Number one is the physical component. And that happens after the peak of panic physiologically, and it starts to come back down. You are still going to feel it physically. Adrenaline does what it does, right? It's pretty predictable. We know what it does. We know what it feels like, and we know how it acts in the body. This is not news for us. So after the peak of a panic attack, when it comes back down and it's kind of over, you could say, okay, the panic is over. And you all know what that feels like, that moment when you begin to feel better and then it sort of falls off and then it's over. So the panic itself is over, but physiologically, you will experience a hangover for a little while. For me, that probably lasted maybe 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes at the outside. I think for most people probably fall in that category. I'm talking about purely the physical hangover, the physical aftershocks, the physiological after effects of panic, which is you'll still feel a little shaky, right? Your muscle tone has been altered. So you have that little bit of shakiness. You just don't feel like you're on solid ground yet. It takes a little while for that to come back. Your legs might feel a little weak. Just in general, you might have that weak sort of shaky feeling. You're just not feeling very strong physically. Your heart rate may continue to be elevated. Now, maybe it's not elevated to the point of 130 or 140 beats per minute where it was at the peak of the panic, but it's also not at 55, right? So your elevated heart rate will remain for a little while. It takes a while for that to fall off and go back to your normal resting heart rate. That's just physiology. That's just the way it goes. You may experience increase in respiration rate that doesn't go back down to your base level, and you may continue to be aware of your breathing for a little while longer. And I think you could see that if you go back and look at the Instagram story that I saved. It's in my highlights on my Instagram account. You'll see that my breathing was still a little ragged for a little while as I was answering questions on Instagram that night after panic. So you may continue to feel a little sweaty, a little clammy. You've probably, if you're like many people, you've sweated profusely throughout your panic. That happens. And that's a cooling mechanism. So you might feel a little cool, then you might feel a little warm. So you'll feel changes in temperature in your body and the level of perspiration. We could probably list 10 different, very subtle physiological things. Your stomach may still be upset. You may feel a need to get to the bathroom. You may have to, you may still feel a little lightheaded, a little dizzy, a little disoriented. So the aftershocks, once the panic itself, like the key part of the panic is over, then you're still going to feel some physiological effects of adrenaline, because it's not like it's a valve. It doesn't just turn off and then there's none. It actually, your adrenals will stop firing and stop adding adrenaline, but it's still in your bloodstream, and it takes a while for that to be metabolized, right, and taken out of your bloodstream. So as the concentration of adrenaline, norepinephrine, whatever you want to call it, is still higher in your bloodstream, you're going to feel the effects, and as it gets metabolized out, there's less and less of it, and those effects will dissipate, but they're still there. So cardiac, heart-related effects, increased heart rate, increased respiration, perspiration, muscle tone, all of the things that adrenaline does. Your vision might still not be perfect, and you just might have that little sort of disoriented feeling. That's normal. Those are the physiological. That's the physical part of the panic attack hangover. That's the shortest part of it. So that will go on for, like I said, anywhere from probably 10 to 20 minutes. Now, if you're still new to this and you're not really good at surrendering to panic and passing through it and letting it happen naturally without fighting it, then you may find that your panic attacks are like roller coasters. You'll say that, well, I panic for hours and hours on end. Well, you really don't. You just panic again and again. It's not one continuous panic attack, but when it starts to come down, we're going to talk about sort of the psychological hangover of a panic attack and how you're reacting afterwards, and behaviorally, you can, in fact, feel another one. That is possible. So you may have that rolling or undulating panic where it comes and goes and comes and goes for long periods of time. That was my first panic attack, looked like that. And for many years, they sort of look like that. So that's possible, right? It is possible. If you're new to this and you haven't learned these skills yet, and you're still getting into it, you're still putting your brain around this, and you haven't had enough time and experience to get good at moving through a panic attack, then yes, that can happen. And some of this may not necessarily apply to you, but it will. So keep listening. So that's why I say the physiological after effects of panic are generally over 15, 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes. If you're really good at it and you're just not afraid of it, which means you're not adding additional adrenaline or fear, 15, 20 minutes, and those things are pretty much over and your body is back to its base state. So that's the physical part of panic attack hangover, sort of the after effect. The second part of panic attack hangover is what I would call the mental, right? So this one is tricky. This one is definitely tricky. The mental after effect of a hangover will leave you feeling shaken, vulnerable, weak mentally, susceptible, afraid, maybe a little bit unsure of yourself. Like, this is all super common. It'll rattle you mentally. And again, as you get better and better at this process, you get less and less rattled. So for me, honestly, after many, many years of this and a lot of practice, when the panic attack is over, well, I'm not really rattled afterwards. That is over within minutes for me because I just don't care about the panic attack. And I know that sounds crazy if you're new to this, but you could get there too. Many, many people do. But for most who have not had the opportunity to practice as much as I have, or maybe you're still working on this stuff, then the mental after effects, the mental and even emotional to a certain extent after effects are real. That's a real thing. The panic attack hangover from a mental and emotional standpoint is a real thing. And it can be lasting. So you will feel all the things that I just talked about: vulnerable, afraid, unsure, uncertain, weak in some instances. You may have feelings of failure or despondency, like, I'm never going to fix this. This panic is going to come and get me forever. I can't get away from it. And beneath all of those things, there's certainly an amount of anger and frustration, for sure, being upset that it happened, maybe feeling that you're failing, especially after you've had a really good run of, I don't know, it's been weeks. I haven't had a panic attack in weeks. And then I had a really bad panic attack and I'm right back to square one. That's a very common part of the mental and emotional panic attack hangover for many people, especially in the earlier stages, early and mid stages of recovery, which is you will declare it a failure. Like, oh no, I slid back to square one. You will forget that your job is not to never panic. Your job is to get better when you do panic, right? Better at moving through it. That's the measure of success. But it's easy to forget that because it's a jarring event and it is frightening. That fear is real, right? We talk about that all the time. So underneath all of those sort of emotional and mental aspects of the panic attack hangover are really two things. Number one is sometimes a feeling of failure, or that you did it wrong. Like, I did it wrong. Somehow I did it wrong. If panic actually happened, it means I made a mistake. I made a recovery mistake and I allowed panic. That's not true, right? That's not true at all. But that's one of the more common underlying currents. And the second underlying current, which is probably really the base underlying current, is I'm afraid that might happen again. So the thing that fuels all of those things, the vulnerability, the unsure feeling, the unsafe feeling, the shaky feeling, you may lose your confidence, will be rattled, and that's going to last for a little while, is all based on the idea that, what if it happens again? Right? So everybody kind of gets in that mode where it's, what if it happens again? And that really is the basis of all of this. All of this is the fear of the panic itself. We talk about this over and over and over. In panic disorder and agoraphobia and anything that involves panic attacks, the problem where it becomes a disorder is when you become afraid of the panic itself, and you are afraid of the next time it happens. You are deathly afraid of the next time it happens. So the psychological and mental and emotional part of the panic attack hangover, in air quotes, is that it's those feelings. It leaves you rattled and it leaves you unsure. Mainly, it may make you feel like, well, what did I do wrong? I need to analyze this to see what I did wrong and how that I allowed this panic to happen. It shouldn't have happened. And I am afraid that it's going to happen again, right? So you can bring it back to the analogy that I use all the time, which is being bitten by a dog. If you are bitten by a dog and that dog is still in the room with you, you will likely psychologically, mentally, emotionally remain afraid for a very long time while that dog is still there, because you think you're afraid that he might bite you again. And in this situation, the panic attack is the dog. Like, you could still feel it, right? So the physiological panic attack hangover is still there for 15, 20 minutes. It's over, but yet it doesn't feel physically all over yet. It's still not completely over. It's still lingering. And those 10 or 15 or 20 minutes where your body is still coming back down to its base level can absolutely fuel and light the fire of the mental, the mental, psychological, emotional panic attack hangover, which is, I still feel it. It's still here, which means it's not really gone. And oh my God, is it going to come back? And what did I do wrong in the first place? So that's sort of the psychological panic attack hangover, the mental, the emotional panic attack hangover. You may feel sad. Some people cry after panic. Some people get really angry that they even let it happen. But those are real effects afterwards. Those are real. And especially if you're in the beginning stages and middle stages of recovery, those could be really amplified. It's okay and expected and normal to have. Sorry, I have to keep hitting the mute button. I've been under the weather the last couple of days, so I don't want to cough at you. But it's normal and expected, and it's okay to have those emotional and sort of mental, hangover components. How long do those last? Well, that leads us to the third thing, which is the behavioral component of the panic attack hangover. And this is probably the most important one, because you don't have to not be human. We're not trying to get to the point where you're just saying, well, I'm not going to have any sort of emotions or mental effects of panic. Of course you are. You're human. I have them too. I don't pay them much mind, but like, even though I'm really good at this, it's not like, oh great, I had a panic attack. I'm not skipping and like, it's not sunshine and rainbows because I had a panic attack. I don't like it either. So it certainly affects me from an emotional and mental standpoint. It makes me feel a little tired. It will make me maybe reevaluate. I should go to bed early tonight. I need to back up a little bit. I need to take care of myself. All those things. It's normal. So it's not so much that you have the emotional, mental, psychological panic attack hangover that may last for an hour or 2 hours or the rest of the night, or even feel it the next day. So those things can linger for sure, but they won't linger forever because on their own, because in the end, your body does come back to a natural state. And this is where the third component, the behavioral component, comes in, because I believe, in my opinion, that this is really what fuels that hangover. Right. So the physical part of the hangover is just adrenaline dissipating. Normal, can't avoid that. It's supposed to happen. You're human. The mental and emotional parts of the hangover, that might last for an hour, 2 hours, a few hours the rest of the night. Again, you're human. You're allowed to have mental and emotional responses to events like panic. That's okay. The issue here is the behavioral part. So the panic attack hangover, in my opinion, is fueled predominantly. And when people say, well, I had sort of a panic attack hangover, I feel like I'm back to square one. I'm shaky now. Everything, I'm right back to the beginning. I'm afraid again. I don't know. Generally is fueled by behavior, which is now you are feeling, you had this event. Your body still feels weird for 20 minutes afterwards. Mentally, you're shaken for an hour or two, a few hours afterwards, and then you begin to behave accordingly. So in this situation, when the panic attack is over, in my case, it was later on at night, right? So I stayed up for a while on Instagram, asked questions. First of all, behaviorally, what did I do? I did not retreat back and like rock in the corner because I had a panic attack. I did not ruminate on it. I did a thing that I do often, which was, for me, I tried to use it as a teaching tool. And I went online and I interacted with people and I tried to document what it was like to have a panic attack. Now, in that situation, yes, I was talking about panic and anxiety, but I could have been answering questions about hockey or playing the guitar. Like, I could have been talking about anything, but I was behaving in a very normal. I could have done that. And you guys have seen me live on Instagram a zillion times in my stories and videos, and like, this is what I do. So I just did a normal thing. It was related to that panic attack, but I did a normal thing. I behaved normally. I was not behaving like a person who had just had a panic attack. And then the next morning, I posted a picture that is extremely rare for me, which was I was in the home gym and I posted a picture that I was lifting the very next morning. And I did that to illustrate exactly this point. So my response to the panic attack hangover was, I'm going to act like I would normally act. I'm not going to change my behavior. I'm going to go right back into the same routine that I would normally have, which was the next morning I got up and I was in the gym early and I was lifting, and I posted a picture of that, which I will rarely ever do because honestly, no, I'm not going to get into the rant, but I don't like that. But I did it to illustrate a point. So the panic attack hangover that then you say is going to last for days or a week. Like I felt like I was in the aftershocks for, days afterwards. It took me days to get back on my feet. I believe really strongly that you are making a choice to not get back on your feet. Right. So you felt a thing. It felt really nasty and icky and terrifying and uncomfortable. Like we all know it does. It lingered for an hour, a half hour. So afterwards, mentally, you were really shaken for the rest of the day or the rest of the night. And then you start to fall back into bad behavioral habits. You retreat. You start to protect and guard and brace and modify your behavior. So if you are victim to the panic attack hangover after you have a panic attack, you feel like it ruins the entire rest of the next 3 or 4 days or a week or more. You really have to sit down and say, well, what do I do? What do I actually do? What's my behavior when that panic attack is over? And you get time to, to come down afterwards. That's okay. I'm not saying at the very minute the panic ends, you got to run out and climb a mountain. That's not what I'm saying at all. I mean, some people do take that extreme approach. You could, nothing would stop you from doing that, but you don't have to do that. You're allowed to kind of come down from it. That's normal. And you totally expect, and you play that by ear. Each panic attack may be different, but in terms of the context that it's in. But you have to really look at that and say, okay, after an hour or so has passed, what can I do now? I got to get back into my normal routine. I mean, the old cliche is I got to get back on the horse. I fell off the horse. I got to get right back on the horse. And that is 100% true. So if you have decided after a panic attack that you are a failure, you're back to square one, none of this applies, and you literally stop doing the things that you should be doing or that you like to do, you stop living your life and you go back into retreat mode from a behavioral standpoint. If you do not get back on that horse, then yes, there's a really good chance that you are literally creating that days-long panic attack hangover. So the panic attack hangover is largely fueled by the change in behavior, or the reversion. For me, you revert back to the things that you used to do, either before recovery or early on in your recovery. Or if you're in the beginning of your recovery journey, then you recognize that you're probably doing this is just the way you live your life now. When you panic, you retreat. You feel like you have to take it easy. You have to rest. You have to be careful. You shouldn't do too much because you might trigger it again. This is all based on the idea that what if I trigger it again? That underlying fear, that is the fear of the fear that drives these disorders, panic-based disorders. That's so insidious. What if it happens to me again? So I have to make sure that I behave differently to protect myself so I don't trigger it. I don't know what caused that panic attack last night, but I certainly don't want to do it again. And so I need to back up. I need to take it easy. I need to do all of those things, right? So you have to be careful about that. You can literally fuel the panic attack hangover, if you're saying that it will last for days and days, by reverting back to those old protective and defensive habits to try and keep that panic from reoccurring, which is exactly the opposite of what you have to do. So if we're at 20 minutes, I'm going to wrap it up. Like I said, if in fact you are in a situation where the panic attack hangover is real for you, you feel like, yes, this is a thing and it happens to me and it lasts for days sometimes, I want you to understand the three components that I just went over. Physiologically, panic, even when it's over, will last for another 20, 30 minutes. The adrenaline takes a while to get out of your body. Mentally, you'll have some after effects. Psychologically, emotionally, you might cry, be angry, be frustrated. All those things, you're allowed to be human. Those might last for an hour or a couple hours, maybe the rest of the day. You can try and shake that the best you can. Allow it to happen. That's okay. But you don't have to allow yourself to go into an emotional fetal position and like, it's over, I'm a failure, I can't do that. Check that. Be careful about that. And then finally, how will you change your behavior in response to the physiology of panic and the emotional and mental and psychological after effects of the panic? That's the secret sauce right there. Do not be careful in how you react behaviorally to the panic attack and its immediate after effects. You can perpetuate that hangover by going into behavioral retreat mode and going back into the old avoidance habits. You're afraid to trigger it again because you don't want that to happen again. So now I go back and retreat. So in my situation, after my last panic attack, I went on Instagram and I tried to teach and I interacted with people, which is a very normal thing in my life to do. So I didn't change anything based on that panic attack that had happened. I went to bed. I think I watched like half a movie before I fell asleep. And then literally the next morning I was up and in the gym and lifting the next morning. Was it still a little bit in my head? A little bit. I'm human. I really am. I'm not afraid that it was going to happen again. I don't care. So that's what allows me to say, well, I just got to get up and move on now. I got to do what I got to do. That was last night. It's over. It's done. Hopefully I was able to teach from it. It's over. And today, what do I have on my agenda? And the first thing on my agenda is I'm going to lift. So I was in the gym. Whatever your thing is, I'm not saying you have to go to the gym, but whatever your thing is, what should my day look like for the rest of today? If you have panic attack in the morning, what was on my agenda for today? Do not cancel everything, run home and lay on the sofa. That would be a very bad idea. You are literally creating a behavioral panic attack hangover when you do that. If it's at the end of the day, like, well, I guess I'm going to wind down the way I usually do, and I'm going to go to sleep the best that I can. Might not be perfect, but I'm not going to change my routine. I'm not going to change my life. So I'm not going to create protracted panic attack hangover by behaviorally accommodating the fear of the fear. I'm not doing that. So you have to really stay on top of that. That's where panic attack hangover can go from like a couple hours afterwards. It feels a little shaky, totally understandable. That's where you can dig a hole and go sit in it for a couple of days afterwards. Now, I'm not saying you choose to do that. I mean, technically we do choose to do that. I used to choose to do that. It's almost an automatic choice though. You're not choosing to suffer. Nobody is intentionally a victim here. I'm not blaming you in any way. I used to do the same things. But those are the instinctual things that say, well, let me try and protect myself from this. And we all know that most of recovery is kind of counterintuitive and sort of runs against that instinct to run away from the unpleasant stuff. So, excuse me. So that is Panic Attack Hangover in a nutshell, 23 and a half minutes into this. I hope it's been helpful. And for those of you who are literally watching, because I'm recording this for you to show on YouTube, so you could watch me do the podcast. If you have questions or comments, leave them below. I'd be happy to try to answer them. I will pay attention to you guys on YouTube this week, I promise. And as I end, I'm going to ask you a favor, like I always do, which is if you're listening on iTunes or any place where you can rate and review the podcast, leave a rating. 5 stars would be awesome if you dig the podcast, and then take another 30 seconds and maybe write a quick review of why you like the podcast, because then it helps other people find the podcast. That's why I do this, to try and reach and help as many people as I can. That is it. I will play you out with Ben Drake's Afterglow, as I always do. You can find Ben, my friend and an awesome musician, at bendrakemusic.com. Hope you enjoy his song, because I play it every week. And that's it. I will see you guys in the next episode. I appreciate your time and attention. As always, I will see you next week. And remember, this is the way. Ask questions. If you got them, I'll answer them.
It's in the lyrics of the songs we know. It's in these feelings that you never show. Yeah, you're doing fine. It's all around you, you can breathe it in. And this is where your story begins. You got the feeling that you're gonna win. Yeah, you're doing fine. Now in the city and you're living fast.
There you go, YouTube. That's what it looks like when I record a podcast at 5 o'clock in the morning. Excuse me, as I'm kind of half coughing up a lung. You guys got to see me keep hitting the mute button. I have a mute button on my little console here where I record. Anywho, that's it. That's podcast episode 168. If you guys have questions or comments, put them down below. You can find the show notes for the episode right at this URL. It's at the bottom of the screen, theanxioustruth.com/168. I'll put them up there. I appreciate you coming by. If you guys dig this, I will try and do it in every episode. It's not that big a deal. I turn on the camera while I record. So hope it worked out for you guys, and I will see you in the next one.